All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome to this. Welcome to the Wilson Center. Welcome to this seminar on Muslim women in Europe, strategic and cultural challenges, hosted by the Middle East program here at the center and the European Studies program. I'm Christian Osterman. I direct European Studies here at the Wilson Center. And I'm standing in for my dear colleague, Haleh Esfandiari, who meant to share this session, knows much more about the subject, but unfortunately is sick at home and hopefully watching us via the live webcast. So, Haleh, hope you feel better. We're delighted to have with us today Senay Özdemir, who will talk about the subject. She's a senior fellow at the Osgood Center for International Studies. She's a Dutch-Turkish journalist based in Holland and a women's rights advocate, founder of the monthly women's magazine Sen. Is that pronounced correctly? Sen, which features the personal success stories of Mediterranean women who participate fully in Dutch society as students, professionals, and civic activists. 7 months after it was launched, Sen was selected as the best new magazine of 2004 by the Volkskrant, one of the leading newspapers in the Netherlands. Before that, she was a guest editor-in-chief of magazines such as Viva and Intermediaire, and a columnist for several women's magazines. Ms. Özdemir and her work have been profiled in many Dutch and European magazines, also in the International Herald Tribune, New York Times, Foreign Policy, a number of other media outlets. In October 2010, the issue of the women's magazine Marie Claire, she was in that issue. She was pointed out as one of the 10 ministers of the ideal women's cabinet. She's a senior fellow, as mentioned, currently at the Osgood Center for International Studies here in Washington, and it's thanks to the support of the Osgood Center that she is can be here with us today, sharing her story. In June 2009, her first novel, The Hearth Club, The Wax Club, was published, and she's currently working on her second novel, Letters from Budapest, based on a true story about 4 generations of Hungarian-American women with a Jewish background. Welcome to the Wilson Center. It's so wonderful to have you here. Let me just say a word about the Osgood Center for International Studies, a non-profit organization that advocates understanding of public affairs and contemporary international issues. The center's aim is to positively affect the lives of participants and prepare them to be better global citizens through quality educational experiences that emphasize short-term learning programs and experiential learning. Ambassador Sally Shelton Colby, who very much was instrumental in setting up this meeting, regrets that she cannot attend, but she made a major contribution to Senay's appearance here today. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you with us to talk to this brave audience who managed to weather the storm, the snow, the ice, the cold out there. I hope you're sort of defrosting, and it's unusually warm in this conference room. Usually this room is bitter cold, so I'm delighted that for once it's actually on the warmer side of things. With that, let me turn the mic over to Senay with a warm welcome and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Christian Osterman so kindly introduced me. My name is Senay Özdemir. I'm Turkish by birth, Dutch and Turkish by nationality, and a great lover, great admirer and lover of the United States by nature. I'm honored to be here to speak to you today about the future of the Muslim culture in Europe. The subject of the growing Muslim population in Europe sparks an ever-increasing level of conflict and tension throughout Europe, and the debate and debacle atmosphere are becoming more inflamed every day, as you can read in the newspapers and see on the televisions. But before I get down to the nature of this conflict and the risks and opportunities which they evoke for a Muslim feminist, let me first give you a few numbers to consider, for a discussion without facts gets pretty sloppy, and everyone has a right to his own opinions, but not to his own facts. There are 1.57 billion Muslims in the world today, which is about 23% of the world population, and more visually, 1 person out of every 4 throughout the world is a Muslim. Islam is the second largest religion after Christianity, and it is the predominant religion in the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia. 60% of the Muslim population lives in Asia, 20% in the Middle East, and 300 million Muslims, like 1/5 of the whole Muslim population, lives in a country where they are in the minority. The Netherlands count 825,000 Muslims, almost 5% of the population. The Turkish and Moroccan groups are the largest Muslim immigrants. Now, whether you Americans realize it or not, your culture, heritage, and history are without question sunk deep in the soil of Europe, pretty exclusively until the 20th century. And until the cotton gin was discovered in the soil-rich South, and Americans discovered that you could grow and sell as much cotton that had massive worldwide demand if you could just get the labor to pick it. Let me quickly and deftly jump back from that prickly issue to say that after World War II, Europe also needed additional labor, and lots of it, to rebuild the farms, factories, and homelands of those war-torn nations. To get that labor, Germans turned to Turkey and welcomed with open arms the fleeing immigrants from Eastern Europe who made a sieve out of the East-West Wall. The French had relations with Algeria, and of which 80% were Muslims, and in many cases, Algerian immigrants could demand access to citizenship in France. The UK's solution was to import cheap labor from its former colonies, mainly in South Asia, to provide its much-needed supply of labor. I bring up this array of historical facts to establish the case that, for the most part, Muslims, like Mexicans in the US, were brought into Western Europe to provide much-needed labor following World War II. They were not just itinerant immigrants. For the most part, they were attracted into the European nations, and they were welcome, at least in the early years. Now that I have described why, how, and at whose initiation the masses of Muslim immigrants came to Europe, let me rattle off a few facts to establish the actual number of Muslims in Europe and how quickly their numbers are growing. In 1950, just after the war, the population of Europe was just 547 million, and the number of Muslims was 11 million, almost 2%. I'm talking about the whole Europe, so not the European Union. Today, in 2010, the population of Europe has grown to 733 million, and the number of Muslims is about 42 million people, or 5.75%. The increasing inflow of Muslims from the Middle East was exacerbated by the fact that the vast percent of Muslims that immigrated into Europe were young and multiplying. But this has to be clarified, since a recent survey in Holland says that the fertility gap between native-born women in Holland and Turkish and Moroccan women in Holland has narrowed considerably. So Turkish and Moroccan women are getting less children than they used to be. Looking ahead, by the year 2020, the population of Europe is expected to be 742 million, and the number of Muslims is expected to be 43 million, or 5.76%. In his address to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe last spring, the organization's head, Egmelettin İhsanoğlu, told the world, "The spate of intolerance of Islam and discrimination and xenophobic treatment of Muslims is not limited to just Western Europe, but prevalent in Europe as a whole." With Islamophobia rising, İhsanoğlu asked, "Are Muslims becoming the new Jews of Europe?" And according to American scholar Reza Aslan, issues swirling around Europe's non-assimilation of its Muslim population recall its anti-Semitic past. In a speech to young members of her Christian Democratic Union Party, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said post-war multiculturalism has utterly failed in Europe, in Germany. Now, for the Chancellor of Germany, a country that has spent the last half-century living down its World War II attempts at genocide, in which about 15 million Jews were killed, to even brook the subject of the failure of multiculturalism is startling indeed. But Mrs. Merkel was quite adamant, saying the so-called multiculti concept that we are now living side by side and are happy about it does not work. Dutch anti-Islam maverick Geert Wilders was invited to speak to Britain's House of Lords and evidently raised great protest in the UK. Wilders was complaining bitterly about the numbers of Muslims who are rejecting historic Dutch liberal values. Now, as a Muslim feminist living in the Netherlands, I'll give you the Muslim side of the issue, but let me first make some true comparisons. I don't think I have to make a whole lot of long description as to what's taking place with Muslims in Europe, because very similar, if not exactly the same conditions, are taking place here in the United States. From the beginning of the United States, you've enjoyed the growth of a rather diverse population coming from all around the world, but who have, for the most part, blended in with the population. But America has experienced a huge increase in the number of both legal and illegal immigrants from Mexico and other Latin countries, many of whom don't seem to be blending. Clearly, some of this immigration was due to thousands of legal and illegal Hispanics coming into the U.S. to find a better life. But equally as clearly, these Hispanics have flooded into the United States to take jobs that many Americans did not want, and they were willing to do this very well for very little pay. With a population of more than 20 million in the country, many, especially the most recent immigrants, are not blending in with the American culture but are forming barrios or enclaves of Hispanic Americans and retaining much of their Hispanic culture. In response to this non-culturalization, many liberal or progressive and governmental institutions have begun to respond to the growing demands for goods and services in Spanish, marque número uno. In places where large enclaves of Hispanics are gathering in parts of America, masses of historic Americans are rising up to fight off what they believe to be the lump in the melting pot, or immigrants who either can't or won't melt to become absorbed into the culture. In response, Tea Party American politicians, sensing an easy issue, are screaming for anti-Hispanic legislation. Some conservative American pastors are preaching to nodding congregations to keep America for Americans. Law officers are being given the authority to deport illegals. Corporate officers who, for the past 20 years, told the lawmakers and politicians to turn a blind eye to what had been a terrific source of hard-working and cheap labor, now want to clamp down on the intruders. That sounds pretty familiar to me. So now let me use this rather quick and rough description of American cultural problems as a backdrop to describe how the cultural challenges I face as a Muslim feminist in Europe. Now, as a Turkish Muslim growing up in the Netherlands, I found the fundamental debate consists of the following questions. First, is there such a thing as a national identity? In my case, is there a Dutch identity I must adopt, or is there a Muslim identity I must discard? A couple of years ago, there was a massive and constant debate on when, how much, and if immigrants to the Netherlands should adopt a Dutch identity. On one side of the debate, the side that says there is a Dutch identity, there is not a Dutch identity, Argentine-born Crown Princess Maxima of the Netherlands says, I quote her, "My search for the Dutch identity began around 7 years ago. I had the help of dozens of generous and wise experts. But a Dutch identity? No, I didn't find one. The Netherlands is large windows without curtains so that everybody can look in, but also the right to privacy and being cozy. The Netherlands is being only given one biscuit with a cup of tea, but also enormous hospitality and warmth. The Netherlands is too complex to sum up in one cliché. A typical Dutch person does not exist." On the other side of the debate, the side that declares there is clearly a Dutch identity, is former Dutch Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers, who says, "There is a Dutch identity. No one would fail to recognize a Dutch person when they meet one," although Lubbers acknowledges the Dutch identity is continually being developed and refined. But according to Ruud Lubbers, real Dutch specifics are enterprising, individualistic, energetic, and stingy. And I've adopted all of them except for the last one. Not before I jump into the debate. My first questions are, does a new immigrant into a host country have a fundamental obligation to relinquish the dress, customs, and language of his or her native land? Or is it solely the decision of the immigrant to decide if, when, and how much he or she will adopt the language and customs of the new land? Second, if the Dutch cannot agree on if there is a Dutch identity, how can they expect me to adopt one? How can Dutch tell migrants what identities to emulate? What should they accept or reject? What is their new identity? Is speaking the language enough, or do I buy a bike and hang lace curtains? Now, the same questions might be asked of new immigrants. What do you know about your own identity? Do you have a real religion of faith, or have you adopted the trappings of family and national traditions as your own? Do you have a passion to cling to your old ways in your new land, and to fight off any changes to your customs or ideas as an infringement of your heritage? Do you find your new cultural surroundings uncomfortable and maybe irritating? Have you tried to reach out to your new neighbors and acquaintances, shopkeepers and so? Or do you only do what communication is necessary to get what you need? Well, I and my family chose to reach out to communicate and to become comfortable in our new surroundings. When we first arrived in Amsterdam, my father said to me, "Senay, we're starting a new life in a new culture. We no longer speak Turkish, we speak Dutch." Right, Dad? Reach out I did. I know Dutch history better than Turkish history. I speak Dutch better than I do Turkish. I even speak better Dutch than some native speakers. I'm comfortable everywhere I go in the Netherlands. Most don't even know I'm Turkish. My family and I knew that if we wanted a future in our new land, and we knew if we were committed to make it our home, we must make it our home. But who I am is still adopting. I'm talking to you now in English. I hope it's not awfully too bad. Now let me climb up on the intellectual diving board, hold my nose, and jump off into the pool of religion and integration. I am a Muslim of Turkish heritage. I was also raised secular, but I'm close, very close, with many Muslims in Turkey, Holland, Europe, and the United States. And as I look at my Muslim friends and family, I can tell you they are incredibly different. I'll tell you that without question and with a certain amount of experience in working with diverse Muslims, a Turk does not understand anything a Somali believes or how he lives. And from everything I've seen, Muslims are surprising themselves when they discover other Muslims whose culture and belief are totally different. Globalization is washing over Islam, and with a tidal wave of strange ideas, rights and realization that is creating vast changes. It may surprise you that, with 5% Muslims in the nation, the Netherlands has no Muslim party. But we do have a party for the animals, which makes the first political party in the world fighting for animal rights and animal welfare. Could it be there's no Muslim party in Holland because there are not enough Muslims who identify with any set of cultural norms to present to others? Probably they will meet with each other in Mecca, but not in a Dutch mosque. And similarly, the vast majority of Muslims have no identity with fundamentalist terrorists. Quite to the contrary, the vast majority believe that Muslim fundamentalists who wish to harm others is a direct threat to their own ability to get along with others. Both here in America and increasingly in Europe, the media are reporting all Muslim immigrants as Islamists. In Europe, we used to be migrant workers or guest workers, but now we are all Islamists. What that says is that we, Muslim people, are defined by our religion, that we are perceived as following an archaic culture, that we are driven by the hatred of Christianity and or Western civilization, or that we are either oppressed, in the case of Muslim women, or we are oppressors, in the case of Muslim men. That's it. That's what the media would have their readers and listeners believe, and that's what they teach other indigenous people to believe. And that's not true, that's not fair, and that's not right. Tell me, how many of you would like to be characterized to others in the world as oppressors of other cultures, as oppressors of other cultures like U.S. ventures in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, as racist as the Ku Klux Klan, as conservative as Sarah Palin, as liberal as Jane Fonda, or as rich and powerful as Bill Gates? And I promise you that while Americans and America is still considered as the homeland of freedom, it's considered by many people around the world to be a power-driven, aggressive, acquiring and exploiting oppressor. But that's not true and not fair either. And everyone here knows that's not true and not fair. There is no exact American identity. You are a smorgasbord. You are liberals. You are conservatives. You are rich and elitist. You are poor and downtrodden. You are somewhere in between of each these extremes. Well, so are Muslim. You know, you in this auditorium, one of the finest minds in America, I believe, the Wilson Center, should be the first to understand that it takes a more sophisticated intellect and understanding to recognize that, just as Americans are not the same, others who are part of different cultures and nations are not all the same either. That it takes a more rational and reasonable person to understand that, within any culture or religion, there are thousands of variables and great extremes. As an editor and journalist, I have met, interviewed, and shared interest scores of Western media people and opinion leaders. Initially, most perceived me as a Muslim and Islamist and some kind of strange being. But after a few minutes exchanging ideas and chatting easily, They forgot about their preconceived opinions, and we discussed many difficult and argumentative issues and ideas with great understanding. And those who would perceive Muslims in Europe, or even here in America, as radical Islamists or jihadists, or angry people, forget that we chose to come here. We, or our fathers or our spouses, chose to leave our ancient Muslim culture and to come to a Western culture. Wouldn't it be logical that if we chose to come into your culture, we don't hate you? Wouldn't it be logical that if we chose to come into your culture, that we are moderates who are reaching out to your culture to find work or escape our situation? Wouldn't it be logical to assume that even if we wanted to adopt your culture, we wouldn't be able to do so immediately, that it will take years or maybe even decades? Neither could you adopt our languages, beliefs, and cultural traditions quickly or easily if you needed to or just wanted to enter our culture. Quite obviously, Westerners, perhaps influenced by the media, are not giving the pluralism of Muslims and followers of Islam the attention it deserves. Many Western scholars have been focusing on examining the Islam as a religion, but with the purpose of preventing radicalization. This approach, from the perspective of Islam as a dangerous and negative religion, is not the same angle as to examine the individual experience of migrants. It has the focus of eliminating the impact of Islam in the Western world. When the first waves of Turkish, Moroccan, and other Middle East Muslim immigrants first came to the West in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was little reaction. Why? Well, the West desperately needed the labor and were happy to have migrants who worked hard and who worked cheap. When the early unaccompanied workers came into Europe, they were called migrants or guest workers. But when their families arrived in the 90s, they were called Muslims or Islamists. And now, after 9/11, they were considered terrorist suspects and intruders. If you trace any religion here in the United States or in Europe over the past 50 years, you will find almost radical liberalization with women priests and far less strident demands and rules applied by the church on parishioners. And for many of the same reasons, globalization and the ability to look at other religions and other cultures is creating liberalization in Islam too. The Muslim societies, whether they like it or not, have to give answers to the question whether Islam connects to the modern world. People around the world interact increasingly. We will be ignorant to think that Muslims do not join the debate. Young Muslims try to break through censorship and taboos and fight for human rights using the high values, Western values, such as freedom of expression, access to information, and democratic participation. I believe it's possible because I live it that way. And I have hope, just simply given the fact that the level of education of Muslims in general, but education of women in particular, has risen significantly. That's why I think the most important and wide-sweeping modernization and liberalism of Islam will come from Muslim women. For the most part, Muslim women are not illiterate. 60% of the university students in Iran are female. Turkey counts one of the highest rates in female scholars, 25%, if you compare it with Holland, which has 10% scholars. But the same goes for the ambition level in Europe. The participation of non-Western migrant women in higher education has triplicated. With access to global reach media, they are awash in information about the role of women around the world. They see that most women around the world are provided more power and freedom than Muslim societies provide them. As a result, they are standing up for their rights, they are starting grassroots equality campaigns, and they are less and less amenable to forced or arranged marriages. Until recently, sex was not discussed outside the bedroom in the Muslim world. But now you find Muslim writers throughout the Muslim are waxing passionately about love and sex and freedoms between men and women. As Christian Osterman said when he introduced me, for years I ran a magazine in Dutch for Mediterranean women with an Islamic background. My magazine openly discussed sex, virginity, women's rights, and lots of issues that are no-nos in Muslim societies. 2 years ago, I penned an op-ed in a Dutch daily NRC about the virginity paradox in Muslim society. That article has provoked massive reactions from the Netherlands to Indonesia. Why would I choose such a subject? Well, Muslim parents in the Netherlands tell their daughters to stay virgin until the day of their wedding. In my view, which was the focus of the editorial, that's an absurd and impossible requirement. Because these parents forget that they were mostly married at a young age, most in their teens. But today, women are getting married later and later. The average now is 24, and many do not marry until their 30s. So parents who were able to satisfy their desires to love and be loved in their younger years now demand from their non-married children that they deny themselves that need and pleasure. But I'm not alone. More and more books and publications written for and by Muslim women are discussing a myriad of issues that were heretofore taboo. I understand when people like Geert Wilders are whining and complaining about the Muslims in the Dutch society and demanding the European societies be held exclusively to Jewish, Christian influences. But I also believe that it's diversity that makes Europe so attractive. My question to Mr. Wilders is, what are you worried about? What are you afraid of? Don't you trust your own liberal democratic society to absorb a new influence? Why are you concerned about the influence of an influx of migrant people who have not tried to organize themselves in any way, shape, or form? And make no mistake about this. There is not and never has been any attempt by Muslims in the Netherlands to organize into a political or economic force. The only other reasonable objection to having Muslims in the Netherlands is that you're afraid that some may be terrorists. Of course, it's possible, but terrorism in Holland is not something new. Between 1950 and 2009, there were 70 terrorist attacks with a total of 30 people killed. From 2004, the murder of Theo van Gogh, the main focus has been on Islamic terrorists. But the figures I gave you are including all the political extremist groups, like the Moluccas, ETA, RAF, the PKK, and the IRA. And let's not forget about this. We do not know precisely why some young Muslim Europeans, like the recent suicide killer in Stockholm, have become radicalized. But most research suggests they latch onto radical Islam because they are disaffected and conflicted about their place in the Western society. In the Dutch press, you see article after article that the controversy about the presence of Muslims in the Netherlands is anguishing. Now, as for myself, I don't see conflict, and conflict I mean debate, words, not as something bad. I'm not afraid of conflict, because conflict brings debate and brings issues out into the open, which is always a good thing. And isn't it a Western heritage to discuss and debate and open up for new ideas? And of course, as a Muslim feminist, I would be the last one to deny we have lots of issues to deal with. But I believe, and I hope, that the Muslims in the Netherlands are not afraid of new ideas, because they already voted with their feet for new ideas when they uprooted themselves from their native lands, most of which are very conservative, and moved to the Netherlands, which is the poster child for liberalism. I see the current debate as a phase during development of the new civilization in the 21st century, and it's a challenging period for all of us. We have a long way to go. Like the Dutch publicist and author of the multicultural drama, Paul Scheffer, mentioned when I interviewed him, conflict does not mean that we are separating. Conflict means that we are interested in each other. We didn't have conflicts until 10 years ago because we were indifferent about each other. But now we realize we are all in this together. I hope I have shed perhaps one beam of light in this pretty dark issue. But hey, as I said, controversy is the start of beginning of understanding. And I want to close my speech with a quote of the British economist John Maynard Keynes. And it goes for both sides. The biggest problem is not to let people accept new ideas, but to let them forget the old ones. I'm honored to be here, and I hope my visit will be of some value to each of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senay, for this stimulating, rich, provocative presentation that addressed a number of topics, from comparing the U.S. immigrant experience to that of Europe to issues of Islamic feminism. The floor is open. We have 20 minutes or so for questions and comments. If you could please, in Wilson Center tradition, identify yourself, state your name and affiliation if you like. Yep. And please wait for the microphone.
Hugh McElrath, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. I think the recent census figures are reflecting that our Hispanic immigrants are integrating at roughly the same rate as all the previous waves of immigration. In the second generation, everybody speaks fluent English. The rates of home ownership are roughly the same as the rest of society. We have a singular disability in that we have not solved the issue of undocumented aliens. Is there something different, and I'm thinking about France at this point, something different about at the level, at a person-to-person level, that Muslims are not accepted in, quote, Christendom, even if they may be in the country legally, that is different? I'm asking that question.
Okay. So that there is some cultural difference between Christianity and Islam?
All right. In this country, we've got a big scandal, a big stumbling block over legal residence. So that's a special problem for the U.S., I see.
Yeah.
I have a hypothesis that in places like France, at the level of human relations, that the native-born population is less accepting of the Muslim minority than we in the U.S. on a person-to-person level are accepting of Hispanic immigrants.
Yeah.
But, that's a hypothesis. I'm testing it with you.
Yes. Well, I'll try to give you an answer to that. I think there is a huge difference between the U.S. and Europe. As you go to the history, U.S. has always been a country of immigrants, and which is not the case for Europe. Europe has a very solid, 3,000 years history, and and America, United States, has been formed by immigrants. So there is also there is already some kind of acceptance that you can create a nation together with all of. But now you see the same in the United States with new immigrants, that it's getting tougher and tougher. I've lived in Austin for almost a year last year, and I see, and I was really amazed by the fact that how do you call that, the when they sell that they're graduated, how do you call that again?
Commencement? Or?
Yeah, they were partying, that school was over, that the Hispanics students were all together, you could tell, and in the whites, the white Texans were together, and I was like, oh, I was really shocked by that, because I didn't expect that as, European Muslim, Turkish Muslim in Europe, to see that happening. And I don't think it has been always like that here. I don't think so. But like I said, the Islam issue has started only after 9/11, and in our case in the Netherlands after the murder of Theo van Gogh. Before that, nobody knew anything about my religion. Nobody asked me. So, and I think in France, if I go to France, it has the immigrants didn't feel how do you say that? Probably they had less difficulties with integrating into France because they already knew the language. They spoke French because they were, they went and went to the former colonies in North Africa to get them to. But when we came to the Netherlands, we didn't speak one word Dutch or English or French. So for French immigrants, it was easier to adapt and to integrate in the French society. And so this hostility towards new immigrants, I believe, has started after, all these problems began after 9/11, but also after the economic recession. And, and people, well, it's very interesting because I just tried to figure out, how it all started. And there's one thing, and maybe it's too provocative, but I also believe that people get scared when they feel threatened about their own place. And I mentioned some figures, but women like me, Muslim women, Turkish Muslim women, but also Moroccan Muslim women in Holland are more ambitious than Dutch women are. And which also creates conflict during conferences and, institutional meetings. Because they're, how do you say that? When it all started, we were just, starting on the career ladder very low, and then we studied more and more and more and more, and now we are keeping them in. How do you say that? We are striving them in. How do you say that?
I'm not quite sure that I understand.
Well,
You're reaping the fruits.
Reaping the fruit?
Is that what you're trying to say? You're gaining the
no.
all that study, now you can achieve something. Yeah?
Yes, and they get higher. They get the higher jobs and the better paid jobs. So it goes it goes really well, and I think natives can feel threatened by that. Food or your economic situation, and all the followers of Geert Wilders, of the PVV, Partij voor de Vrijheid, Party for the Liberty, they feel that their neighbors, their Turkish and Moroccan neighbors, are getting more successful than they are. which makes people, of course, scared, I believe. I believe that's one of the reasons why people also don't want to connect anymore.
Can I perhaps follow up on this? The issue of integration, I think, goes back further than, of course, just 9/11. Otherwise, why in Germany would have been this huge effort in the 70s and 80s on multicultural integration and so forth. But I think
we didn't discuss it. There were problems, but we didn't discuss it. Paul Scheffer, the guy, he wrote the multicultural drama in 2005, and it was one of the first essays about the multicultural drama. So that's quite late. If the first immigrants came in 1960 to the Netherlands, of course there were essays and there were researches, but he came with the first essay, with a provocative essay about the failure of the multicultural society in the Netherlands.
I wonder if you could talk about this and also talk about what you just were responding to in terms of your own experience in running a very successful magazine. Did in that capacity you run into the kinds of issues that you were just talking about as an enterprising, accomplished Muslim woman in Dutch society?
Mm-hmm. What do you want me to tell? Where do I start?
Well, are there any issues of significance that?
Well, everybody was surprised that I started this magazine, because people thought, why aren't you going to read our magazine? The Flair, Marie Claire, the Viva, all the existing magazines. And I said, I think my readers, Mediterranean women with an Islamic background, don't connect with your readership, don't connect with the articles you write. Simply given the fact that the editorial rooms, that the newsrooms where these magazines are being produced are white. If you don't even, sense anything of what I feel as a migrant Muslim woman living in the Netherlands, then you can't write about me. You can write about me, but then you have to be interested in me, and you have to come to my home, and you have to share how I live, and then you can write about me. So that's why Sen was successful, because all these Mediterranean women felt connection with their stories. And all these stories were not told yet. Because simply, they were too busy to find themselves a place in their new country. And I can tell you that my generation was one of the first women, Turkish women, who went to study. We didn't have any role models. So we are paving the way for the future generation of Muslim women. And I can tell you, they don't look like me at all. They're so much more different than me. I have readers who throw away their headscarf because they want to be liberated, and I have readers who wear a headscarf. So, how do you know when somebody's going to do this, and how do you know when somebody's going to do that? And I think it's all about finding their identity, and my magazine helped them to find, to in their search for their identity.
Thank you. I want to go to another question, but how, just informational, what's the print run, or what's the readership of the magazine?
Yeah, I don't run it anymore because I came to Texas to teach at UT. It started in 2004, and I printed it for 2 years, and I sold it to a large publisher, a publisher of Marie Claire also, and we printed it for a year together, and then I went online. So it's online now. It's only online.
Excellent. Thank you. Question over here.
I'm Roger Hardy. I'm a visiting scholar here. Back home in London, I was for many years with the BBC, and the last radio program I did, which was earlier this year, still on the BBC website, was about women in Amsterdam, Muslim women in Amsterdam, and we focused on Moroccan women. We reached a conclusion that we hadn't expected to reach, my producer and I'd like to see whether you agree with this or not. Rather to our surprise, let me just say, by the way, in case any of the people in the room think that you are the only woman of this, the other women are not like you in Amsterdam. There are plenty of women like you in Amsterdam.
Yeah, can I say something now on that?
By which I mean feisty Muslim women who are speaking out for their rights.
Yes, which is also the main focus of my visit here, because many people, when they see me on the streets or when they just see me somewhere, they don't think I'm Turkish, I'm Muslim. They always think that I'm something different, which is not the case. So, okay.
Let me bring in the Muslim men, because the conclusion we reached was that there are signs that modern Western life is very attractive to many Muslim women, but equally it's very threatening to Muslim men. At least it seems so. Maybe it threatens the traditional notion of what a man should be in a Muslim family and a Muslim society. It threatens patriarchy and so on. And we felt that making that problem worse, maybe in the case of the Moroccan men, is that they seem to have more of an identity problem than the young Turkish men. Maybe because they come from villages in the Berber areas of Morocco, and the culture shock of coming to cold, wet Northern European secular Northern European countries was very strong. But on this question of whether Muslim men and Muslim women are responding and reacting and adapting to, let's call it modernity, in very different ways. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I have a very simple clarification or explanation for that. The reason why Muslim women of Turkish and Moroccan descent in Holland are achieving better at universities and schools is also because they see work and study as a legitimate reason to go away from home. So that's their that's the legitimate reason to tell their parents to be free, to be in liberty. Men don't need that. They can just tell their parents, I'm going to school, and after school I'm meeting my friends, and after friends, I'm going to, to the disco. Or women, Muslim women, unfortunately, don't have that liberty yet. So that's also the reason why they focus themselves on their study, on their colleges, and on their work. Because, like me, if, I'm raised secular, but we were Muslim, and my father was a secular Kemalist. He was very emancipated, but some things we just couldn't do. We could go to school, we could go to road trips of school, but we were not allowed to wear miniskirts, and we were not allowed to have boyfriends. that was just no. So we knew that. But we also knew that if we went to a road trip to Berlin, we could meet guys. And my father, he sent us to road trip. So that was the only reason why we could, how we could meet the other gender. So I totally agree with you. Men have a lot to lose when they, how do you say that? When their spouses are going to liberate. But I don't agree with the fact that Muslim men are not emancipated. I believe that once people have sensed a certain amount of liberty together, a certain amount of social economic position together, so when they share both, a beautiful home and 2 cars, that these men are not going to allow their spouses or girlfriends to stay at home and not working. Because I have met quite few Turkish men in Istanbul, for example, that are willing to take care of their spouses. They're like, she can work. Let her work. I'm not going to take care of her anymore. So, and I think it's a good thing.
Let's take a couple more questions. Özge, and then the gentleman up front.
Hi, Özge Saygıner, fellow Turkish person. I work for the Cold War Project. I have 2 questions. I've been to both Holland and pretty much all over Europe, and as well as Moscow. And first question that I see as a problem was the respect of the lifestyles between women. Whereas, the Turkish Muslims have a different lifestyle. Even if they get liberated, they have, they don't grow up with that liberty. So it's not basically in their genes, I may say. So do you think the Eastern mindset on Turkish women brings a natural conservativeness, even if they're liberated, and they look at the Western women from those eyes, which is not respected where they come from originally. And I think this may be one of the problems of where they lack of the dialogue in between, because they don't want to hang out to each other because they don't particularly have good feelings about how they live their femininity, or like how they hang out with their friends or so on. And the second issue is the public opinion. So we have this dominant Eastern culture in Western Europe, and then the media, of course, but as well as the public opinion. These people going to school with Turkish guys who are fighting, or people who are very aggressive, or families getting married and having 5 babies in France just to benefit from the social services. And then, of course, the neighbors are seeing this, and and this spreads in the community. So I think it's the effect is much more than the media. I think it's more about like the education of the immigrations in Europe, and I was wondering if you know any other ways to raise the public opinion a little bit, and also educate the immigrants about how to fit in, not maybe fit in, but how to adjust their traditional values to the Western world. Thank you.
Okay, and if you could just pass the microphone over to the gentleman, and we'll take those questions together.
Have you ever seen, Stanley Cover with the Cato Institute, have you ever seen Fiddler on the Roof? You don't know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. Famous American musical about a Jewish family in Tsarist Russia, 3 daughters. Daughters are getting married. Okay. First daughter, they used to have arranged marriages. First daughter wants to marry for love. Oh my gosh. The father relents to this. Second daughter wants to marry a political opponent of the Tsar. She will be exiled. Father's in agony. He relents. She's marrying for it's a new world. Third daughter wants to marry out of the religion. At that point he says no. And the theme song of Fiddler on the Roof is tradition. Without your traditions, your footing on this earth is as insecure as that, as a fiddler on the roof. You're going to fall off. And it seems to me what we're talking about, and it goes beyond this, because this is like about Jewish guy in the shtetl in Russia, this pendulum of tradition versus modernity. This guy's willing to make a few accommodations, but he can go only so far. Then it swings back to the tradition, because that, we're talking about identity, that defines his identity. Might be worth, like, just as a comment, but putting this in a larger context, this is not a unique phenomenon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right.
Well, I can already comment on that. Well, what I've always felt very as a shame is in my own experience is how come why would I feel that my tradition and my culture and my religion is inferior to the other persons, to the other persons? I think it's very dangerous to say to someone that it's that he or she is coming from a backward tradition. A tradition is a tradition. You just get it with your when you're born and living your life in this family. And if you don't have enough guidance, if you don't have enough questions be asked in this family, then you just take it, as something. It's there. It's a fact. But if you have enough guidance, like I had with my father and my mother, there's one thing I really want to share with you, because I went to a Dutch school, and it was a migrant school. It was a black school by then, so most Turkish children were there, and but the level of education was a little bit, adjusted to these children because they couldn't talk good Dutch. And so the director of the school said to my father, well, Senay has to go to another school where there are more white children. The level of the school, this Christian school, is a little bit better for her to go. Or she has to skip a class, a year. So my father, who was a teacher, he said, no, she can't skip a class. So we send her to that other school. I went to this other school, but this was more Christian school than I used to go. And every Friday we went to church. And every Friday, because it was really heavy Christian school, we had to pray there. And so I went home, and I said to my father, well, we're going to church. And I was like 8 or 9. And I said to my father, well, we're going to a church every Friday. And they pray there in the church. And my father said to me, it's fine. You can go to the church. You don't have to pray, but you can just look and watch what they're doing. And I think it's a big lesson for me, because one of the things my father was then doing is exposing me to other cultures and religions and traditions. But he only did that because he was not afraid of losing his own identity, because he was not afraid of getting contra questions. He would get contra questions from me, because as an 8 or 9-year-old, you have a lot of questions about Christianity, but also about your own religion. So I came home and asked, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Why, and my father was also triggered, and he had to know a lot about our religion too. So, yeah, that's why I found out a lot about my own religion and about my own tradition. Your question about the lifestyle, I hope I understood, but you mean the clash between the Eastern-minded women and Western-minded women?
Yes,
The ones who want to wear headscarves and the ones who don't want to wear headscarves?
I think not just that, but also...
just to make,
yeah, sure. I mean, but also, I know from my mother who's a professor in Turkey, and also a Greek lady married to my father who's Turkish. And, she adopted, and then she would work, and she would come out, she would still cook, and then she would still take care of us, and then she would still have to keep her womanly side, versus my Dutch friends don't worry about it because they know that their boyfriends can cook or their husbands are capable of taking care of themselves. But on the other hand, they don't respect that, or they see it as a woman being almost like a slave to a man, even if they're educated or liberated. Therefore, they do not respect them. Therefore, they don't want to be with them.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if this is a correct observation, or is it just...
Well, it's very strange because the picture I showed you of this woman, where is she? This is my neighbor. She's Judith. She's Dutch. She lives, next to my house. She has now 3 kids, but she has 5 now. She's high educated. She graduated at the University of Groningen, and her husband is also graduated. But she decided to just make 5 babies and be a part-time mom. She's a receptionist with a degree. If I would be doing that, people would say, oh, she's oppressed. She has to sit at home and make 5 children. But if she does it, it's her own choice. So that's always the constant debate that we're in. And I also think we have the same debate with our sisters, with our Muslim sisters. Sometimes I'm like, you shouldn't be thinking that you're a better Muslim because you wear a headscarf and I'm not wearing a headscarf. If you are, if you expect me to accept you as a, openly religious Muslim woman, then you should be accepting me as a not openly religious woman. And then the public opinion, well, yeah, I believe one of the best things to do is entrepreneurship. So when people do things together, they create more understandings for each other. And then, it's not something very strange. I know, for example, when people say, I have friends in Texas of all places, and I have friends there, they're Spanish, they're American, they're Canadian, and when they put on Facebook that their Muslim friend is coming, they always expect, somebody who wears a headscarf. But then you come there to the party that they have organized for you, and they see something different. I think that's one of the best things you can do to show the diversity of all people. It doesn't matter, whether it's Islam or Christianity. Entrepreneurship, doing things together, is one of the best things to integrate. And
thank you. We're just about out of time, so unless there are any...
It's so much more difficult to debate in English.
You've done a terrific job.
No, but
yes,
really, but the real discussions always begin also after the discussion, of course. But that's also one of the things, that we are lacking. We need more spokespeople. We need people who can just, talk. And debate in a language that people can understand each other. And I feel sometimes I'm like, oh, why can't this be in Dutch? Because in Dutch I can do this, blah. But I'm happy. This is my first time, so.
Thank you, and thanks for doing this in English so that all of us could share in your experience, your fascinating and inspiring experience. We greatly appreciate. I think all of us have new added sense of the complexity of Muslims in Europe and of the issues they face. Thank you all for, again, braving the cold and the snow out there. Let's give a round of applause to Ms. Özdemir.